Well, folks, as it turns out, you can't go home again. So, first of all, I just want to send a huge shout out of thanks to Erica Griffin inviting me to participate in this old phone challenge. And I wanted to see how far back I could go, what could still be usable as a daily driver. Now, my first smartphones just don't work anymore. One of the more inspirational experiences, this PPC 6700 can't even connect to a modern Wi-Fi router. It only uses WEP encryption, and I currently don't have a router that supports that. Now, thankfully, I didn't have to stray far. This era of hardware saw the rise of HTC, shifting from ODM, which that means making hardware for other companies to just slap their label on, to selling devices directly to consumers. If Palm Pilots and the Apple Newton were the golden age of mobile tech, this phone here represents somewhere near the end of the Silver Age, released after the original iPhone 2G launched, overlapping the end of Windows Mobile with the beginning of Android. I think this is a perfect phone to showcase the changing philosophy behind portable computing. Where Android and iOS streamlined the user interface, built walled garden app stores, and delivered smoother touchscreen performance, Windows Mobile very much wanted to be Windows XP in your pocket. Warts and all, this interface is clumsy and complicated, but it would take Google and Apple years to match the outright functionality and flexibility. Windows CE could totally do stuff, it just wasn't very pretty. And for all the time that's passed, we still have debates on things like skins and software updates. This phone here originally launched with a heavily skinned version of Windows Mobile 6.1 that tried to deliver gestures. Now, TouchFlow was an early forerunner to HTC Sense, with the skin we find on newer Android devices, and I didn't particularly care for it then. If you think the update situation on Android is tough, these phones rarely got any kind of love from manufacturer or Microsoft. So I'm running Windows Mobile 6.5 on this HTC, which changed up the app drawer. We can see these weird sort of hexagonal tiles that don't really make a lot of sense from a UI perspective. And they also changed up the home screen, which I can go back there, to this sliding gesture interface. Microsoft really was blindsided by the iPhone, and they were trying as hard as they could to catch up here. Unsurprisingly, Windows Mobile 6.5 was one of the last dying gasps of the platform, and it didn't really find a whole lot of favor with fans of Windows Mobile nor the general public, especially consumers that were just starting to covet devices like the iPhone. So how does this chunky little buddy hold up today? Well, pretty terrible. I mean, that's not going to be much of a surprise. But overall, I did find a few surprises going back to this phone. Now, first of all, this puppy is slow. And unfortunately, as you can see, I get stuck a lot trying to visit web pages because of security certificates. So that instantly curbs a lot of the fun from using a gadget like this. If and when you do finally get Twitter loaded up in a web browser, chances are probably pretty good that you've already forgotten what you wanted to tweet. And I did have to use a web browser because most of our apps for web services are no longer supported. Social media just moved on. And that proved the next major hurdle. I never kept my old Windows Mobile apps, the cab files for Winmo, which are similar to the APKs that you can use to sideload apps on Android. I used to have a memory card in this phone where I would install games, and I long since recycled that, used it for another phone. And there's really no way to replace those old gems of some really fantastic Office applications, games like Age of Empires or Doom. So I just had to settle for my all-time favorite bubble popping game. But for all these problems in daily operation, it really didn't take me long to get back into the feel of Windows Mobile. The screen is resistive, not capacitive, so it takes a lot more pressure to get it to recognize an input and to also track movement. It's definitely a thicker feel than what we're used to on modern smartphones, but thankfully, at least I had an actual IMAP-capable Outlook that I could still keep up with my email. Now, the keyboard on this buddy is pretty great, even if there's often about a full second lag between your input and when characters come screaming into existence. That's tricky to use, especially if you're trying to input things like passwords. Also, this smaller display is tough to read in daylight, but the resolution is surprisingly decent. compared to more contemporary options. It's twice the resolution of the original iPhone in a smaller overall package. Best of all, the battery life was obviously terrible, but it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. For comparison's sake, the cell in the HTC Touch Pro is about 10% smaller than an iPhone 5, about 20% smaller than the iPhone SE, and with very judicious use, most of that on Wi-Fi, yes, it does have WPA encryption, I could just about make it to lunchtime, maybe a little bit past. One important note, after 10 years on the original battery, yeah, this is the original replaceable battery that I got with this phone, I haven't had any issues running this device all the way down to its low power warning without experiencing a sudden shutdown. It's doubtful that Windows Mobile is throttling CPU performance to maintain system stability, so I'd really like to know what Apple's excuse is for having such poor battery performance as their phones age, but I digress. Oh, this camera was such cutting-edge fare back when this phone was brand new. 3.2 megapixel shooter, autofocus enabled LED flash. This thing really was killer. A major problem with any older gadget, you can just see how the plastic cover which protects the lens element here is really worn, scratched up, scuffed, faded, and starting to fog. And like with everything else related to this phone, performance is obviously slower than you would ever want to use out in the field today. But of course, the major bummer with a mobile device is the lack of any kind of headphone jack to connect decent headphones to your mobile multimedia audio playing device. I've long since lost the mini USB adapter. Hilariously, 10 years later, we're right back to a terrible dongle experience. Even for this phone's heyday, the only convenient solution was migrating to Bluetooth. And the more things change, the more they stay the same. So ultimately, unfortunately, no, I couldn't quite make this an actual daily driver phone. I'm just too busy and this thing is just too slow. But I'm glad I reached back this far for my challenge. There are some really good ideas here. I loved coming back to this. HTC pulled off something incredible here. This is a micro laptop form factor running a micro laptop operating system that arrives in almost the same form factor as a Nokia candy bar phone. This is simply an astounding feat of engineering for its day. Before the HTC Touch Pro, Windows Mobile was a mess of buttons and switches and knobs and D-pads and control surfaces, and HTC produced the prettiest version of that they could. Now, in part, they got there by ripping off Apple's iPod click wheel to help you get through menus and navigate through the UI, but I would still totally rock a phone in this general shape today. With a few more tech steps, stuff like better audio AI assistance or heads-up display, smart glasses, we could make this all screen, keep this really sweet, tasty, QWERTY keyboard, and just pack this with better internals, and I would totally be sold. And it should be pretty obvious that I'm just a huge sucker for nostalgia. So why not revisit some of this Silver Age design? There are a few companies that are doing pretty well looking back to their past. As always, folks, thanks so much for watching. You can subscribe to this channel for more of my videos, but you should also totally check out the other old phone challenges on this playlist. And you can join the conversation with your own old phone or challenge your favorite reviewers to also shoot their own nostalgic look back at some of their favorite classic gadgets. There are, of course, links below on how you can support production on this channel, including checking out my Patreon campaign, where you can get early access to videos, production diaries that I'm publishing, contests, and other fun perks just for patrons, just for subscribers over there. So definitely check that out. That's always greatly appreciated. Of course, you know where you can catch me around the internet at SomeGadgetGuy on the Instagrams, the Twitters, the Facebooks, all of that fun stuff. And I will catch you on the next video.